This next chapter is a very simple rundown on the financials of solar power. If I've done this well enough, and I hope I have, this should give you a pretty good simple rundown on whether this is financially a good thing to do or not. In other words, will this be a waste of money, or will this actually give you a payback? So anyway, I hope you like it, and here it is.
Is the cost of solar power worth it? I guess the first question for most of us is how much will it cost? First, you're going to need to figure out how large your system needs to be, and once you know that, you can figure out the cost and whether you can afford to do it and whether it's worth it. For this discussion, let's assume you would like to get your power bill down a significant amount. Let's say you'd like to get your electric bill down by about $100 a month. There are, of course, other reasons for doing this that might motivate people to get one of these installed. There are the save the planet people and all that. This little simplified cost analysis that follows is for folks who just want to know if they can save some money by doing this. For you environmental crusaders, it might be good to just take a look at some of the financial considerations so you'll have a better idea of what the cost might be. To save $100, well, you'll need to know how much power that amounts to. The electric utilities measure the power they sell you in units called kilowatt hours. An old incandescent light bulb might be rated anywhere from 25 to 100 watts or so. So if we had a 100 watt light bulb, it would take 10 of them to use a total of 1,000 watts. If you used 1,000 watts steadily for an hour, as in 10 100 watt light bulbs burning away, you would use 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. How much 1 kilowatt hour of electricity will cost you is determined mostly by where you live. In the US, that cost can vary anywhere from about 8 cents to nearly 40 cents per kilowatt hour. Just to pick a number that could be typical, say an average home uses about 1,000 kilowatt hours of electricity in a month. Now, if you live in an area where power is cheap, about 8 cents a kilowatt hour, 1,000 kilowatt hours is going to cost you about $80. If you live where power is more expensive, say around 40 cents a kilowatt hour, it's going to cost you about $400. From this example, it's easy to see that if your total electric bill is about $80, there's no way you're going to save $100 a month. But if you're paying about $400 a month, if you could just cut that by, say, 25%, well, there's your $100. So the more your power costs are, and that depends largely on where you live, the more likely it is that you could save some money using solar. In addition to that, even if you live in one of the cheaper power areas of the country, if you use a lot of power, you can still save a respectable amount of money by installing some solar power. To find out what you are paying, you need to go to your power company's website and look it up. They usually call this a tariff rate or electric utility rate or something like that. When you find it, you'll eventually get to a table where you can find your rate. Some of these are not that easy to read because there are many categories and subcategories to choose from. There are also surcharges for various things like using power during certain times of the day, usually called peak demand usage. Usually there are increased charges when you go over a certain number of kilowatt hours during the month. For example, where I live, residential power costs about 9 cents until you rack up 400 kilowatt hours. If you use more than that, any additional above 400 kilowatt hours will cost you about 11 cents. It goes up again if you cross other thresholds where other increases happen. Trying to figure all this out by looking at the power company tables can be a bit daunting and confusing. So perhaps the best thing to do to figure it all out is to look at your past electric bills and see what it has been costing you. If you can find these bills or look them up over some period of time, say about a year, all the better to get a good idea of what your electric power is costing you on average year-round. A rule of thumb I would use here is that if your electric bills are over $400 a month, you could definitely get a cost-effective return using solar power. If it's about $100 a month or less, probably not. Is it worth it? People usually determine whether it's worth it by figuring out if it is cost effective by figuring what they call a return on investment, or an ROI. For example, if you could save $100 a month using solar power, how much money does that add up to over a period of time, like 1 year, compared to how much this system could cost you to install? Well, in this case, the savings in 1 year is $1,200. Now, if you could keep doing that for, say, 5 years, it adds up to about $6,000, about the cost of a basic solar power system. That means your payback, or return on investment, will take 5 or 6 years perhaps. From then on, that $100 a month is money in the bank. The next obvious question is, can you put up a solar system for about $6,000? Yes, you can get very close to that. But if you hire a contractor to do everything, turnkey, it'll be more likely closer to $15,000 to $25,000. Then your ROI will take much longer, and the initial outlay will be much more painful, and this might make it less likely to be attractive. So, if you are a bit techie and are comfortable as a do-it-yourselfer, you have a real financial advantage here. There are other justifiable reasons for doing this other than strictly a return on investment. As I mentioned before, if you're an environmental crusader, the cost might not be too important as long as you can afford to do it. Another good reason is to simply get your cost of living down. Someone who is facing retirement the next little while might want to pay attention to this. When many of us retire, we're going to be living on a fixed income. Most of us will have a higher income before retirement than after retirement. That's why folks work so hard to get that home paid off, or maybe buy that newer car before they retire, because after retirement, income is going to be less. Many of us could afford to put one of these solar systems in before we retire, but we wouldn't be able to do it after we retire because we just couldn't afford to do it then. But after we retire, one of the fixed costs that is practically guaranteed to increase as time goes on is your electric bill. So, from that point of view, this might be worth it simply to get your cost of living under control and down during your retirement years rather than just because of an ROI analysis. Either way, if the numbers work for you, or it's a good way to get your retirement cost of living down, you might want to go ahead and do this. If you do, strongly consider doing the installation work yourself, or at least directly supervising it. From what I have seen talking to other people who've had this done professionally, usually more than half the cost of the finished system is the contractor's labor and profit charges. Now, I don't think for a minute there's anything wrong with a professional charging for their services. But if you're not capable of doing most or all of the work yourself, it will cost you much more. But it's not solely about the money. If you don't have the basic understanding needed to do this yourself, installing it and getting it running, what will you do if the system stops working for some reason? To use a well-worn cliche, who you gonna call? That's why you should consider doing this yourself, because if you do it yourself and something does stop working, at least generally you'll know what needs to be done to fix it. I have an acquaintance who works for the power company, and he tells me about visiting many homes that have a solar power system installed, but it's not operating, and it hasn't been operating for some time. If you're going to spend the money on one of these, and you don't want to end up being one of those people who doesn't have a clue what to do or who to call if it stops working. But to answer the question that we started out with, is it worth it? Yes, it is worth it if you're in the right circumstances, such as high electric rates, or you use a lot of power and you have a place to put the panels and a sufficient level of working knowledge to keep it running.